In this video, we're going to build a clone of the dashboard page of the YouTube Studio app using .NET MAUI. Before we get started, if you like this type of content and would love to see more, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. So first, we'll create our .NET MAUI project in Visual Studio. To do this, we'll launch Visual Studio, and on the Start page, we'll click the Create a New Project button. On this screen, you can search for the .NET MAUI app template using the search bar. We'll select .NET MAUI app and click Next. Here, we'll name our project and click Next. We'll leave .NET 9.0 selected as the target framework and click the Create button. Visual Studio has created our project for us with the default template. Now if we run the app, we should see our image, text, and button, and we can click on the button and the UI gets updated. So all of that's working, and we can stop the application and begin building our application. If we take a look at the YouTube Studio app, which we'll be cloning, we can see that there's a tab bar at the bottom for navigation to other pages in the app. So that's what we'll be adding first. So we'll come over to the Solution Explorer and create a folder for our pages. We'll also create another folder for our view models, as we're going to be using the MVVM pattern for this application. While we're at it, we can also create a folder for our models. Now we can begin adding our different pages. So we'll right-click on the Pages folder we just created and select Add New Item, and we'll scroll down and select the .NET MAUI Content Page XAML option. We'll name our page Dashboard and click the Add button. We'll change the text on the label to Dashboard and repeat the process for each of the other pages in the tab bar. Once we're done, we should now have a XAML file and code behind file for the Dashboard, Content, Analytics, Comments, and Earn pages. Now that we have our pages, we can now tell our app to display the tab bar when the app is launched instead of the default main page. So first, we'll delete the mainpage.xaml file, and then we'll head over to the appshell.xaml file and remove the shell content element that was pointing to our main page. In its place, we'll add a tab bar, and inside it, we'll add a shell content object for each of our pages. But first, we need to add a XAML namespace for our pages folder. So we'll do that at the top of the file. Now we can create a shell content, set the title to Dashboard, and set the content template to our dashboard page using the data template markup extension. We'll repeat the process for the other pages. So we can just duplicate our shell content multiple times and modify the values. To see what we've done, we can run our app, and we should see the tab bar at the bottom of the screen. We can click on each tab to switch between the pages, and we can confirm that that is working because the text in the label changes. Now if we look again at the YouTube Studio app, we can see that in addition to the text, there are also icons for each tab. Fortunately, our shell content element allows us to set its icon property, which will then show up in the tab bar. However, we currently do not have the icons in our project, so we'll need to install a NuGet package. So we'll right-click on Dependencies and select Manage NuGet Packages. Over on the Browse tab, we'll search for Uranium UI. From the list of results, we select the Uranium UI.icons.material icons package and install it. Before we can use the icon fonts, we'll need to register them in the Create MAUI app method in our MAUIprogram.cs file. We'll add a using statement for Uranium UI at the top, and then we can call the fonts.addMaterialIconFonts method here. With the NuGet package installed and set up, we can now begin using the icons in our app. So we'll head back to the appshell.xaml page, and we'll add this namespace for our material icons at the top. We can set the shell contents icon to a font image source object. We'll set the font family to material regular and set the glyph to the dashboard icon using this syntax. Finally, we'll set the color for the icon using an app theme binding. We'll set it to black for light mode and white for dark mode. We can repeat the process for the other shell content elements in the app shell file. For the others, we'll use the material outlined font family. If we run the app again, we can now see the icons above the title for each tab. So with our tab bar looking good, we'll now focus our attention on the title bar for our app. From our reference, we can see that the title bar has a logo, text, and 3 toolbar items. We can customize the look of our title bar by setting the title view property on our app shell. So we'll add a grid with 6 columns using the column definitions property. We'll create the YouTube logo manually and place it in the first column. To do this, we'll add a border and set its background color to red. We'll set its width request to 45 and its height request to 30. We can set its stroke to transparent and give it a stroke shape of round rectangle with a corner radius of 10. Finally, we can give it a padding of 5. If we run the app, we can see the red rectangle with rounded corners. To finish the logo, we'll add the play icon. We can do this easily by adding an image control. We'll set the image source to a font image source and set the glyph property to the play arrow icon from our material icons library. We'll set the color to white and the font family to material regular. So if we run the app again, we should see our completed logo. Next, we'll add the studio text by adding a label and setting its text property to studio. We'll give it a font size of large and set the font attributes to bold. We'll also set the vertical options to center and give it a margin of 10. To place it in the second column, we'll set the grid.column property to 1. Our third column has a width of star, so it can take up the remaining space. We'll now add the toolbar icons in the last 3 columns. So we'll add an image and set its grid.column property to 3 so it gets placed in the 4th column. We'll give it a horizontal margin of 15 and leave the vertical margin as 0. Then we'll go ahead and set the image source to a font image source and point to the add circle outline icon from our library. We'll copy and paste the image for the second icon. Change the grid.column to 4 and change the glyph icon to notifications none. So here's how it looks so far in the app. We'll now add in the last toolbar icon, which is our profile image. So for this, I've added the image to the images folder under the resources folder. To make our image circular, we'll add a border and set its width and height to 30. Then, we'll set its stroke shape to round rectangle and give it a corner radius of 15. We'll set the stroke to transparent, give it a horizontal margin of 15, and place it in the last column. Now, inside our border, we can add an image and set its source property to the file name of our profile image. We'll also set the aspect to fill. So if we run the app, we can see our completed title bar, which now stays the same across the different pages. Let's now focus on building the UI for the dashboard page. So back in our project, we'll head over to the dashboard.xaml file. If we take one more look at our reference, we can see that a grid would work well as the base layout for this part of the screen. So we'll remove the label and add a scroll view and set its padding to 15. Inside the scroll view, we'll add our grid. We'll specify 4 columns of equal width and 5 rows, with the last row taking up the remaining space. We'll set the row spacing property to 15 and the column spacing property to 5. Now we can begin adding the controls. We'll add our circular profile image the same way we did in the title view. So we'll head back to the appshell.xaml file, copy our border with the image, and paste it inside the grid. We'll change the width and height request values to 80, remove the margin, and set the radius for our round rectangle to 40. We'll also remove the grid.column setting as we want the image to be in the first column, which is the default. Next, we'll add a vertical stack layout and set its grid.column value to 1. We'll set the column span to 3 so it takes up the space of the remaining 2 columns. We'll add a spacing of 4 and a padding of 10 on the left side. Inside the stack layout, we'll add a label for our channel name, set its font size to medium, and make it bold. We'll add a second label for the subscriber count, set its font size to large, and also make it bold. And lastly, we'll add a label with the text total subscribers. If we check the app, we can see that it looks good. Back in our dashboard page, we'll add the label that says Channel Analytics, set its grid.row to 1, and set its grid.column span to 2. We'll make it bold, and give it a font size of medium. We'll also add another label, set the text to last 28 days, and also place it in the second row. We'll set this label's grid.column to 2, and also give it a column span of 2. We'll set the horizontal options to end so that it's right aligned, and center it vertically. Now we can work on this part of the UI that contains these cards. So we'll add a border and place it in the third row. We'll set its column span to 2. Inside our border, we'll add a vertical stack layout with 2 label controls. We'll set the text property on the first one to views and set the text color to different shades of gray for light and dark mode. For the second label, we'll set the text value to a random number, set the font size to large, and make it bold. We'll copy and paste our border for the second card and set the grid.column property to 2 for this one. Then we'll set the text for the first label to watch time hours, and also change the text for the second label to a random number. Now if we take a look at what we've done in the app, we can see our cards. However, the cards still need some work. Since both cards have similar characteristics, we'll create a card style that we can apply to both of them. So we'll head over to the Styles folder under the Resources folder, and in the styles.xaml file, we'll scroll to the bottom and create a style. We'll set the target type to border and set the key to card. Inside the style, we'll add a property setter for the border's background color. We'll set it to white for light mode and gray 600 for dark mode. By the way, if you're wondering where these colors come from, they're defined for us in the colors.xaml file. We can also define our own colors here if we want. Back in our card style, we'll set the stroke to transparent, give it a padding of 16 on all sides, and set the stroke shape to round rectangle with a corner radius of 10. Now we can go back to the dashboard page and apply the style to our borders. We'll set the style property and point to our card style using the static resource markup extension. We'll do the same for the second card. Now if we run the app again, we should see our cards looking much better. We'll now work on the final section of the dashboard page. So first, we'll add this latest published content label. So we'll head back to our dashboard.xaml page, and below the cards, we'll add a label and set its text to latest published content. We'll give it a font size of medium and make it bold. Then, we'll set its grid.row to 3 and its grid.column span to 4. With that added, we can now focus on adding these expandable cards for the recent videos. Rather than simply hard-coding the values in the UI, we'll create a view model with some dummy data and bind to that from our XAML using the MVVM pattern. Now, you'll remember that we created folders for our models and view models in the first video. So we'll right-click on our models folder and add a new class. We can name it Content Model, as it'll represent a piece of published video content. Inside our class, we can begin adding properties for the title, description, views, likes, comments count, date published, ranking, average view duration, and click-through rate. Next, we'll head over to our View Models folder and create a new class which we'll name Dashboard View Model. To make our lives easier, we're going to be using the MVVM Community Toolkit. So we'll search for the Community Toolkit.mvvm package in the NuGet Package Manager and install it. Back in our Dashboard View Model, we'll add a using statement for the Community Toolkit.mvvm.component model namespace and have our class inherit from observable object. Next, we'll add an observable collection of our content model class and call it recent videos. This is what we'll bind to in our XAML file. First, though, we can populate it with some data. So we'll create a constructor and set the recent videos property to a collection containing 3 instances of our content model class. Now, if we take another look at the reference, you'll notice that the cards all have the same layout and similar characteristics. However, we won't be using a style for these cards. Instead, we'll use what's called a bindable layout. This will allow us to create a template and bind to our recent videos collection. So we'll add a stack layout and set its grid.row to 4 and its grid.column span to 4. Next, we'll attach our bindable layout by setting the bindable layout.item source and binding to our recent videos observable collection. Inside the stack layout, we'll add a bindable layout.item template and we'll add in a data template. Inside our data template, we can now begin working on the UI for the cards. First, we'll add in a border. We'll set its style to our card style that we created in the last video so that it has the same background color, corner radius, and padding as the other cards. We'll add a margin of 15 on the bottom. We can also set a shadow on our border. We'll set the brush to gray 400, the radius to 1, the opacity to 0.9, and the X and Y offset to 0. Inside of our border, we'll add in a grid with 3 rows and 2 columns. The image will go in the first column while the title and description will span the rest of the space. We'll add row spacing and column spacing values of 10. Next, we'll add our image. First, we'll paste the images we'll be using in the images folder. You'll want to make sure that the names of the images match with the values of the thumbnail property in our dummy data. Once we've done that, we can add in our border with a transparent stroke and a round rectangle stroke shape with a radius of 8. Inside the border, we'll add an image control and bind its source to our thumbnail property. If we run the app now, we should see our 3 cards with the images showing in the first column. However, as you can see, nothing shows up below the published content label. This is because we forgot to connect our view to our view model. So first, we'll head over to the mauiprogram.cs file and register our view and view model in dependency injection. We'll add in the using statements for our class as well. Then we'll open the code behind file for our dashboard view and modify the constructor to inject in an instance of our dashboard view model class. Inside the constructor, we'll set the binding context for the dashboard page to our view model instance. Now that our view knows about our view model, we can now run the app and see our cards show up. Back in the project, we'll add in a vertical stack layout and set its grid.column to 1. Inside it, we'll add 2 labels. We'll bind the text of the first one to our title property and set its line break mode to tail truncation. We'll set the text of the second label to bind to our date published property. Below the vertical stack layout, we'll add a border with a grid.row of 1, a grid.column span of 2, and a height request of 1. This will create a simple line or divider below the title and thumbnail. If we run the app again, we can see that what we've done looks good. For the final section of the card, you'll notice that it can be clicked on to expand the card and show more stats about the video. We can implement this easily by using the expander control which comes with the .NET MAUI Community Toolkit. So first, we'll need to add the .NET MAUI Community Toolkit NuGet package to our project. So we'll head over to the NuGet Package Manager and search for the Community Toolkit and install it. Next, we'll go to the mauiprogram.cs file, and below the Use MAUI app line, we'll add the Use MAUI Community Toolkit method call. Finally, we'll head over to the dashboard.xaml page and add in the XAML namespace for the toolkit. Now that we've installed the Community Toolkit, we can head back to the data template for our bindable layout. Below the divider line we added last time, we'll add in our expander control. We'll set its grid.row to 2 and its grid.column span to 2. Then we'll also set the name property so that we can reference it later on. Next, we'll add the header section for the expander. Inside it, we'll add in a grid with 7 columns in total. The first 6 columns will have a width of auto, while the last one will take up the remaining space. Inside the grid, we'll add this icon for the view count. So we'll add in an image control and set the vertical options to center and the grid.column to 0. Then, we'll set the image source to a font image source with a font family of Material Regular. We'll set the size to 22, set its color with an app theme binding, and finally, set the glyph to the bar chart icon from the Material Regular family. Next, we'll add a label in the next column. We'll give it some horizontal margin and make it vertically centered. We'll set its text property to bind to the views property from our content model object. Now if we run the app, we can see the icon and the view count on each of the 3 cards. To add in the remaining icons and labels, we can simply copy and paste our image and label twice. We'll modify the grid.column for the second image to 2 and update the glyph property to point to this thumbs up icon from the Material Regular family. Then we'll set the text property for the label to bind to likes instead of views, and set the grid.column of the label to 3. For the final icon, we'll set the grid.column to 4 and update its glyph property to show the comment icon. We'll also update the text on the label to bind to our comments count property and set its grid.column value to 5. If we run the app, we can now see all 3 pairs of icons and text displaying the dummy data we set up in the previous episode. To finish out the header section, we'll need to add in this arrow in the last column and ensure that it changes depending on whether the card is expanded or not. So back in our XAML file, we can add in an image control and set its grid.column to 6. We'll also set the horizontal options to N so that the icon is aligned to the right in the available space. To display the appropriate icon based on the state of the expander control, we're going to be using what's called a data trigger. So inside the image, we'll add in a collection of triggers. Then we'll add a data trigger for first scenario, that is, when the card is expanded. So we'll set the target type of the data trigger to image. Then we'll set the binding to the isExpanded property from our expander control using this syntax. Next, we'll set the value to true. So this trigger will fire when the isExpanded property of the expander control is set to true. Inside the data trigger, we'll add a setter for the source property of our image. Inside the setter, we'll add a font image source and set its font family to Material Outlined. We'll give it a size of 22 and set its color with an app theme binding just like the other icons. Then, We'll set the glyph to the keyboard arrow up icon from the material outlined icon family. Now we can add the second data trigger for when the expander is collapsed. So we'll copy the entire data trigger and paste it below. We'll change the value to false and update the glyph to show the keyboard arrow down icon instead. With that set up, we can finally work on the body for the expander control. Looking at our reference image, we can see that a grid will also work perfectly for this layout. So, beneath the expander.header, we'll add in a grid with 3 columns and 5 rows. We'll set the row spacing to 12 and the column spacing to 5. First, we'll add a border in the first row. We'll give it a column span of 3 and some vertical margin. We'll set its height request value to 1. Next, we'll begin adding in these rows consisting of 2 labels and 1 icon. So we'll add the first label. We'll place it in the second row and set its text to ranking by views. Then we'll add in another one that binds to the ranking property from our content model and place it in the second column. Lastly, we'll add an image in the last column and set its image source to the keyboard arrow right icon from the material outlined family. Before we add in the rest of the rows, let's first run the app so we can see the expander in action. When the app loads, we can see the icon we added via the data trigger for the image control. Notice that when we click on the expander, the icon changes and we can see the content we've added in the expander body. Now we can finish up the rest of the expander body by copy and pasting these controls and changing the text and icons to display the correct data. We'll also need to update the grid.row properties so it's all correctly laid out. With that done, we can run the app once more and see what we've built. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Have a good one.